Black America. What if I told you the Marine Corps did not just discriminate against black men? They engineered a system specifically designed to break them. A swamp camp in North Carolina. White drill instructors hand-picked for cruelty, heat, disease, and conditions calculated to make black men quit before they ever saw combat. What if I told you not only did these men refuse to break, they went on to embarrass the entire institution that built the trap? They fought in the bloodiest battles of World War II. They earned citations the Corps had no choice but to hand over. They forced a Commandant to stand up and publicly admit he was wrong. The Marine Corps thought they had the perfect plan to make these men disappear. They were wrong. And this is the story of how wrong they were. Now, understand who was running the Marine Corps when this all went down. His name was Thomas Holcomb, 17th Commandant, and he did not hide how he felt. In April 1941, he sat before the Navy's General Board and said these exact words: "If it were a question of having a Marine Corps of 5,000 whites or 250,000 Negroes, I would rather have the whites. That is not a rumor. That is documented testimony. That is the man in charge." When President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802 in June 1941, banning racial discrimination in the defense industry, Holcomb ignored it for close to a year. The Marine Corps was the very last branch of the American military to open its doors to black recruits. Not just slow, last, dead last. And when they finally had no legal choice, they did not welcome these men. They built them a swamp. In April 1942, the Corps started construction on a segregated training facility called Montford Point. It sat on 5.5 acres in North Carolina, carved out of a peninsula in the New River. The rest of Camp Lejeune had miles of beaches for proper amphibious training. Montford Point had none of that. What it had was flooded forest, snakes, alligators, bears, mosquitoes so thick they blotted out the air, summer temperatures that hit over 100 degrees, winter cold that dropped below 10. The men lived in cardboard tents with concrete floors, potbelly stoves for heat, and outhouses for bathrooms. No recreation facilities, no proper equipment. Meanwhile, white Marines trained just down the road with everything they needed, and there was one rule above all others. No black man was to give orders to a white Marine, not ever. When these men arrived, their service record books were stamped with one word: colored. Did not matter if you had a college degree. Did not matter if you had been a doctor, a lawyer, a professor. You came in as a private, you stayed a private. 75% of those early recruits had some college education, and not one of them was allowed to become an officer. Holcomb made sure of that with Letter of Instruction 421, a formal written directive that blocked black Marines from being promoted to lead white ones. This was not informal racism. This was policy on paper. Hold that thought for a second, because this story connects directly to a pattern that goes much further than one base in North Carolina, and we need you to hear what's coming. Hey family, real talk. YouTube has shut down channels for telling exactly these kinds of stories. So I need you to find us off this platform. Go to blackstories-untold.com, join our mailing list, and make sure we stay connected no matter what they do. Now, back to what happened next, because here is where things start to shift in a direction the Corps did not expect. In January 1943, Edgar R. Huff became the first black non-commissioned officer at Montford Point. A month later, Gilbert H. Johnson, a 19-year veteran of both the Army and the Navy, became the first black drill sergeant, and he was not there to make friends. Johnson was relentless, ferocious. He once described himself this way: "I'm an ogre, but fair." Fellow instructor Edgar Huff put it even simpler: "You've got to be better than any Marine at New River." These men understood something the Corps had not planned for. If black Marines were going to have any chance of surviving what came next, on the base and off of it, they had to be built beyond reproach. The black drill instructors pushed their recruits harder than the white instructors ever had, not to break them, to make them unbreakable. Meanwhile, off base, the harassment did not stop at the fence. Local business owners refused service to Montford Point Marines. Police officers in the surrounding towns arrested black Marines and charged them with impersonating a Marine because they could not conceive that the uniform was real. These men were not even allowed to enter Camp Lejeune without a white Marine accompanying them. Think about that. They were Marines, and they were treated like trespassers on their own base. But by spring of 1943, over 1,000 men had completed training. The 51st and 52nd Defense Battalions were formed. Ammunition and depot companies were assembled, And on April 16, 1943, the first black unit to deploy overseas, the 1st Depot Company, left Montford Point. The plan was simple: keep them away from combat, assign them logistics, supplies, ammunition loading. The racist assumption underneath that plan was just as simple: they would crack under pressure. They would run. They were not real Marines. The Pacific Theater was about to prove every single part of that assumption dead wrong. June 1944, the island of Saipan. The Marines were pushing inland against one of the most brutal defenses the Japanese had mounted in the entire war. Nambu machine guns, artillery, banzai charges in the night. Lieutenant General Holland Smith's forces were taking casualties faster than they could be replaced. His reserves were gone. He had nothing left. So he did what the Corps had sworn would never happen. He sent the Montford Point Marines to the front, armed, into live combat. Men who had been told their whole time in uniform that they were not fighters. Men who had been loading ammunition in the killing heat while bullets flew overhead. Those men picked up their rifles and moved forward. Robert Sherrod, a war correspondent for Time magazine covering the Central Pacific, reported that the black Marines who entered combat for the first time at Saipan performed at the highest level. The detachment of the 7th Field Depot, the 18th, 19th, and 20th Marine Depot Companies, and the 3rd Ammunition Depot Company were included in the Presidential Unit Citation awarded to the 4th Marine Division for the seizure of Saipan and Tinian from June 15th through August 1st, 1944. That is not a participation ribbon. That is the highest unit honor the military gives. And these men were not even supposed to have been in combat. And this is where everything connects. Because this moment, Saipan, 1944, is the moment the entire argument for exclusion collapsed. The new Commandant, Lieutenant General Alexander Vandergrift, had been watching. And after what he saw in the Pacific, he stood up and said this: "The Negro Marines are no longer on trial. They are Marines, period." The man who replaced Holcomb had to publicly walk back everything the institution had stood for. That is not just a quote. That is the Corps admitting it was wrong. But the story was not finished, not even close. Fall of 1944 brought the Battle of Peleliu, a coral island so brutal that some historians say it should never have been fought at all. And on that island, a platoon of black Marines fought through enemy fire, captured an airstrip, and saved a company of white Marines who were surrounded and out of options. The white company's leaders refused to formally recognize the Montford Point Marines who saved their lives. They were rescued by men the Corps had stamped colored in their service records, and those leaders could not bring themselves to say thank you. That tells you everything. February 1945, Iwo Jima. More than 500 black Marines landed on those black sand beaches. Ammunition companies, depot companies, under direct fire, driving trucks and bulldozers across a beach that was being shelled from 3 sides. For many of the white Marines around them, it was the first time they had ever seen a black face in a Marine uniform. But what those white Marines saw was not what the Corps had promised them. What they saw were men holding their ground in the worst conditions of the entire Pacific War. For their actions on Iwo Jima, the black Marines earned the Navy Unit Commendation Ribbon. General Carl Mundy, 30th Commandant, later said they showed guts, determination, and boundless drive to succeed and excel. Brigadier General Edwin Simmons added that their role on Iwo Jima and the other battlefields made the simple statement: they were Marines and fought as Marines. 9 black Marines were confirmed killed in action during World War II. 78 were wounded, and every one of them, every casualty, was a man who technically was not supposed to be anywhere near combat. Now here is the full weight of what this means. Thomas Holcomb retired from the Corps in 1943. He went on to serve as the United States envoy to South Africa from 1944 to 1948, the country that would soon formally introduce apartheid. The man who built the policy of exclusion inside the Marine Corps retired to work alongside one of the most openly racist governments on Earth. Meanwhile, the men he tried to keep out were dying on Peleliu and Iwo Jima, winning presidential unit citations and holding the line when no one else could. When President Truman signed Executive Order 9981 on July 26, 1948, formally requiring military desegregation, Montford Point began its final chapter. On September 9, 1949, the camp was decommissioned. Integration became official, and in 1974, 3 decades after these men had proven themselves in the Pacific, the camp was finally renamed. Not Montford Point anymore, Camp Gilbert H. Johnson, named for the man who drilled these recruits into warriors. Hashmark Johnson, the ogre who was fair, Frederick Clinton Branch had become the first black commissioned officer in the Marine Corps Reserve on November 10, 1945, the 170th anniversary of the Corps' founding. He had been told to forget about officer candidate school when he first asked. He persisted anyway. He completed OCS as the only black man in a class of 250, and he resigned his commission in 1955, not because he failed, but because the discrimination inside the institution never stopped. The Corps could not even keep the man who broke its own color barrier. That is how deep the rot went. In 1965, over 400 Montford Point veterans gathered in Philadelphia and founded the Montford Point Marine Association. They kept the story alive themselves because no one else was going to do it. Then in November 2011, 66 years after the war ended, President Barack Obama signed legislation awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to the Montford Point Marines. On June 27, 2012, the formal ceremony was held at the United States Capitol. Obama stood before them and said that, despite being denied many basic rights, the Montford Point Marines committed to serve our country with selfless patriotism. The medal's inscription reads, "For outstanding perseverance and courage that inspired social change in the Marine Corps." 70 years. That is how long it took to say it officially. And as of January 2026, individual medals are still being presented to surviving veterans in their 90s and to the families of men who never lived to hold one. A Navy ship has been named the USNS Montford Point. Families of these Marines have walked its decks. But here is the truth you need to carry with you. The Marine Corps did not integrate because it had a change of heart. It integrated because black men refused to be broken. They integrated because A. Philip Randolph, who built the first black labor union in this country, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, threatened to march on Washington and told Harry Truman directly that black men were in no mood to bear arms for a country that treated them like enemies at home. They integrated because men trained in a swamp, called colored in their own paperwork, denied the right to lead, denied recreation, denied recognition. Those men went to Saipan anyway. They went to Iwo Jima anyway. They bled anyway. And when the smoke cleared, there was not a single argument left standing. The story they tried to erase is not really about one camp in North Carolina. It is about what happens when a system designed to break people runs directly into people who refuse to be broken. The Marine Corps tried to humiliate them, and instead, they humiliated every lie the institution was built on. Over 20,000 men trained at Montford Point, more than 13,000 served overseas, and the Corps that swore it would rather have 5,000 white Marines than 250,000 black ones ended up needing these men to hold the line when it mattered most. That is the story they erased. That is the one they did not want you to know. Now you know it. This was Black Stories Untold, and as always, thanks for watching. If you want more stories like this, click the video on your screen now.